Welcome, everybody. I'm Virginia Zonbrecher. I'm the Associate Director of the Congo Basin Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to this Rainforest Day panel. Our panel is going to be talking today about a project that I think fits really well with this year's theme of the World Rainforest Day, The Time Is Now, because it's a project that already is working on rainforest restoration and replanting efforts. And I'm going to introduce my panel briefly here. I'm joined by Scott Paul, who's the Sustainability Director of Taylor Guitars. I'm also joined by Dr. Zach Chunju, who is an agroforester in Cameroon and also the founder of the Higher Institute of Environmental Studies in Cameroon. And finally, by Dr. Vincent DeBlau, who's the project manager for the Ebony Project and a research scientist with the Congo Basin Institute. Before I hand over to our panel, I want to give everybody a little bit of a background on the Ebony Project. This is a project that really grew out of three goals and three needs. From Taylor Guitars, there's an interest in having a sustainable supply chain of ebony, which is a tropical hardwood used in guitar manufacturing. From Dr. Zach, there was a strong interest in promoting native fruit trees and working closely with communities. And from the Congo Basin Institute, there was an interest in better understanding the ecology of tropical rainforests and particular trees, and understanding how to regenerate those trees. So we've worked with communities in the area. These are communities that we already had relationships with. We've talked to them about the idea of replanting ebony and locally valuable fruit and medicine trees. And the communities who have decided to join us have signed memorandums of understanding where we put forward what the project will provide and they put forward how the community will participate and what the community will provide. And based on that so far, we've worked with 8 communities to plant 21,000 ebony trees and about 6,000 locally valuable fruit and medicine trees, all in Central and East Cameroon, which is located in Central Africa. In addition to the planting work and the work with communities, we've also been conducting a lot of research to better understand ebony as a species and how it fits into tropical rainforests more broadly. So with that background, I'd love to engage our panel a bit here. And my first question is for Scott. Scott, it's not necessarily common for a company to reach all the way back down its supply chain to a wild grown raw ingredient. Can you tell me a little bit about Taylor's journey to this point?
Yes, thank you. And it's nice to see Dr. Zach and Vincent and yourself again. So Taylor Guitars is a San Diego-based guitar company. We source tone woods to build guitars from all over the world. The average acoustic guitar is made up of 5 to 6 different species, tropical and temperate. And really the last decade, our world has started to see some significant change. For some 200 years, makers of musical instruments could rely on a steady, predictable supply of largely old growth, tropical and temperate species, with little thought or concern. It was brought to us in the United States or Europe and increasingly Asia by other larger markets. But more recently, we've really started to see some dramatic changes. We all know that we're quickly approaching 8 billion people on the planet. Forests are being lost and fragmented. And we're realizing that buying wood for musical instruments in 10 years is going to be very, very different than it was 10 years ago. So we've started a range of initiatives, the Ebony Project perhaps being the flagship, other projects in Hawaii with urban wood, where it's increasingly important that we get on the ground and understand what is happening, that we're working with the right people in Cameroon at a very community level. So we understand the impacts of our purchasing decisions. We ultimately ended up in Cameroon when we had a chance to purchase an ebony mill and take direct control over the sourcing of ebony. So if there were issues, we and we alone were accountable for what was happening in the region. So we invested in Cameroon, and a few years into it, we started becoming increasingly curious about ebony in the wild and the degree of scientific knowledge. And the Ebony Project was born out of that desire.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Zach, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. You were really passionate about the idea of including locally valuable fruit and medicine trees in this project, and not just ebony as something that's being planted. Can you tell us a little bit about why that is and why it's been challenging to plant those locally valuable fruit and medicine trees?
Thanks a lot, Virginia. It's great to see Scott and you and Vincent on this panel. Let me confess that introducing high-value fruit trees or medicinal plants in the Ebony Project has been challenging. But the good thing is that I spent 30 years of my time developing simple vegetative propagation technique, which could help the domestication of these high-value fruit trees. So when the Ebony Project pops up, it was a good opportunity, a golden opportunity for me to really apply what I've been trying in the research for the last 30 years. I really thank Bob and all those involved in this project who really gave me the opportunity to apply what I have been working on for the last 30 years. It was really challenging to introduce high-value fruit trees in the Ebony Project because the methodology of producing these high-value fruit trees, even Ebony, these methodology were not known before. So it was a learning school for everyone. But the second important thing to remember is that when you conduct any reforestation program under tropic, if you don't involve the local population, definitely you are not going to succeed. And so the skill we had already developed for the domestication, we use it in the Ebony Project. And then the farmer in Ed community were very happy to see that we are empowering their capacity in producing not only Ebony, but the most attractive and high-value indigenous fruit trees which they use in their daily life. Can you imagine that through domestication, through grafting, through marketing, trees like Evangel gabonensis could produce just 3-4 years after planting. But in natural stand, this tree would take 15 or 20 years. So it was a good opportunity to integrate these improved trees in the Ebony Project, helping the farmer to cultivate what they like, what they use in their daily life.
Great. And as a follow-up for people who may be tuning in and maybe aren't familiar with some of those locally valuable fruit trees, can you give us an example of one or two, what these trees are, what they produce?
Yeah, I just quoted the Evangel gabonensis, known as bush mango, but the bush mango is the price is in the daily life of local population in East Africa, West Africa, and right to Liberia. People use this bush mango for their diet. It is a very rich fruit. The kernel is very rich in protein, in mineral, and everything. And then the value, the market value is very high. If you imagine a 50 kg bag of cocoa and a 50 kg bag of bush mango kernel, the price goes from 250,000 CFA or $500 to $40 for cocoa. So you see that if we really emphasize on the cultivation of these trees, definitely we will bring local population to protect their forest, but mostly to improve their livelihood style because they will generate income through the sale or the marketing of all these products.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really exciting part of this project, is that it does a lot to incorporate these native tree species that help with food security, they help with household income, and they're also ecologically supportive because they're native to the region.
Absolutely.
Vincent, Dr. Zach alluded to some of the challenges in learning to grow these, and that was certainly true of ebony as well. Can you tell us a little bit about where we started from and what we've learned so far and how to grow ebony?
Yeah, thank you, Virginia. And hi, Scott and Dr. Zach. So, well, we know that ebony, the African ebony, is shade tolerant and relatively slow growing species. It's also known to be easy to multiply in nurseries because the seeds germinate quite well and the species survive relatively well in nurseries. But the problem with this technique is that, you know, seeds are not available year long. Of course, there is a specific season for seeds, and also from year to year, you see large variation due to the environment or the natural cycle of the species. So we had to think about other ways first to multiply the species. So the first thing we did is to develop a technique to do in vitro multiplication that was quite successful. But this is still ongoing work, so it's something we are also we will have to develop, continue to develop in the future. And we also developed and researched multiplication through simple cuttings, because this is also relatively easy to do, and we were successful doing so. So the tree can be multiplied through cuttings, though it's also still in development because sometimes the cuttings take the growth of the cuttings is not optimal. And so we continue also using seeds, of course, in the project because they germinate very well. And as the project continue to grow, we have more community joining in, and the people that we train in those communities can gather seeds in their environment. So we were successful in getting seeds, large quantities of seeds every year. And so we developed techniques and research to understand what's the best and optimal way to germinate those seeds and keep them alive long enough in the nursery to be transplanted, because as it is a slow growing species, so it needs sometimes to be like more than a year to be transplantable. So ebony is not like many other species in that regard. And what we also have done is to monitor the species, the trees we have planted, the people in the communities have planted in the communities. So every year we have monitored the survival and the growth of those trees, because it's very important for us to be sure that the work that those community members have done will lead to successful plantation and numerous trees that they could use in the future. So we have found actually that the tree survived quite well with survival rates above 70 to 80%, depending on the place, after 5 years, which is relatively good compared to other species. Yeah, I think that summarizes what we have done so far in multiplying the species.
Great. Yeah, so I think the diversity of things that we've looked at has been an important learning lesson as part of this project. So the seeds are difficult to gather and they're inconsistent, but you know, as it turns out, nature designed it so those seeds have everything that those species need to regenerate. But cuttings, which you referred to, which is just taking a small piece of, you know, a small twig or branch or even part of a leaf, and putting it into a substrate, you know, that can result in some of these trees growing, although we still have a lot to learn about how they're shaped. And then Dr. Zach, you had mentioned grafting and marcotting, you know, these techniques that are common in agroforestry, where you take a living tree and you're able to make a second offspring out of it. And then I think finally the tissue culture, which still has a long ways to go, but we've moved hardwood tissue culture further than really anybody else ever has, is going to be increasingly important as we think about reforestation of areas that have been deforested and trying to produce some of these native species at scale. And that's a good segue to another question I had for you, Dr. Zach, which is, there's a lot of tree planting initiatives that are going on now. There's a lot of focus on numbers, on hundreds of thousands or millions or even billions of trees being planted. And our project is a lot more about durability and making sure that those trees are in a good spot. They're in a good spot because they're a species that grows naturally in that space, but they're also in a good spot because the community around them actually wants the trees there. Because we can plant as many trees as we want, but if the people who live in that space day in and day out value that land for something else, like agriculture, they're not going to leave those trees standing because they need that space to grow food. So can you tell us a little bit about what community engagement has looked like in this project, and maybe some of the things that we've learned so far?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Virginia. Let me complete a little bit what Vincent just said. By empowering farmers to produce their own trees and plant in their farm, this was really innovative for the Ebony Project. When you talk of planting trees in the forest, it sounds like easy thing, but usually farmers in the forest are reluctant in planting trees because they sometimes see trees as an obstacle for the development of their agricultural activities. But with Ebony Project, we succeeded to introduce not only Ebony, but all the important high-value fruit trees, medicinal plants, and timber forest trees. And they accepted it easily because they were the actors of producing these trees for themselves. And to answer the question you just asked, the most important thing to remember for this Ebony Project is the booklet, silvicultural booklet we have developed with the farmer. The silvicultural booklet is just a book which really develop the biography of the farmer, map all the trees the farmer has planted in his farm, mainly in the fallow area. So over years, after 10, 20, even 100 years, it would still be the owner of these planted trees. And this is really innovative because before, when you planted trees, it was almost very difficult to come back 1 year after and to prove that you were the one who planted this tree. But through Ebony Project, with the silvicultural booklet, it has solved a lot of problems, and farmers are so excited to know that the trees they are planted, they are using the fruit now, they are using the product now, but also they are assured that their future generation, 2-3 generations, will use, will benefit of this work. And this is some crucial thing to mention here. The domestication work has really helped because we have changed the way of planting trees now. If you don't know the tree, don't plant it. You only plant what you know. And this is also a revolution in the tree planting, because if you plant the trees and realize 20 years after that it was a wrong tree, you just only have your eyes to cry. Yeah? But today, the selection at the nursery goes up to the farmer. And we were very, very fortunate to empower farmers with these techniques. So today, they can plant their selected trees in their farm and be the owner. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really important points in there that are key to the context of Cameroon. So Dr. Zach, you mentioned how land ownership and land tenure is a really significant problem in these areas. The rule of thumb is that that individual people don't own pieces of the forest. And so in order to make sure there's incentives for people to plant these trees and to tend them, one of the things the project has really needed to contend with is how can we make people feel secure that they'll have some sense of ownership over these trees that they've taken the time to sow and tend as they get older. And the booklets have been an important part of that. And I want to mention one thing that's been really great about this collaboration is, Dr. Zach and Vincent, your teams have been collecting this amazing data from the field. I mean, really fine-tuned the outlines of individual plots, the names of the farmers associated with them, the exact number of species that are in there, growth information about those species, when they were planted. And one of the things that we've been able to do with Taylor Guitars is to put that all into a really powerful database. I don't know, Scott, if maybe you want to talk briefly about the genesis of that idea and what we've been able to do with it.
Well, Tableau is a software program. It's a data visualization tool that businesses use to forecast their business. We applied it perhaps for the very first time to an environmental program, and Steve Thoralt, our business intelligence manager here at Taylor Guitars, started working regularly with Vincent. And Vincent and his team, and he can do a far better job than I can explaining the data collection. A lot of it was handheld, a lot of it was pen and paper or iPads, just the collection of data of every sort imaginable, from the collection of the seed to the growing at various nurseries, both ebony and fruit trees, planting, survival rates, spread out geographically over a region. And Steve Thoralt at Taylor was able to transfer that data onto the Tableau database and giving us real-time data visualization of what's happening within the project. It's really quite amazing, and I think quite unique. Maybe Vincent, you can talk a little bit about how this has changed things for you and your team, because you're now able to track changes across the landscape more in real time.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Scott. So these data are it comes from the regular visits we do in the place where people are planting ebony and other fruit trees that Zach mentioned. And it's really fundamental to collect all these data. And I think it's actually a large part of the project activities. It's not just to plant the trees, train the people, and it's also to come back regularly to just observe how the trees are surviving and what are the driver for survival, for a good survival and a successful plantation and project. So thanks to this data set, we've been able to understand what's the best place, what are the best place to plant ebony. And it was sometimes a bit of a surprise. I mean, it's not exactly what we anticipated in the beginning. Like as it is a shade-tolerant species, we are more expecting the tree to survive very well in shady environment, and that to be because it's its natural habitat. But at the end, it happened that the trees survive very well and grow much faster in environment that have been largely impacted by human activities, where light is more present. So now we understand what's the best compromise between the availability of light in the plantation and the care that's needed from the farmer, because that's also an important aspect, of course, of the tree to survive, is that some care is needed during the first years. And of course, we don't want that to be too much of a burden for the farmer participating. And I think for that, the database, and which is visible in this Tableau system, has been very useful. Yes, thanks.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to what Vincent said, that so far that the Tableau has been largely an internal tool, a project tool, but it's certainly our hope to use it as a storytelling vehicle. It's just so important for us to communicate what it is we're doing, our successes and our failures. We write about it in the Taylor Guitar magazine, Wood and Steel. We have a website, creelycam.com/resources, where all of the peer-reviewed scientific papers that Vincent and his team have worked on are published. And all of this information and Tableau is extremely important in our ability to tell the story. And if we can't tell the story, then our likelihood of being able to grow this project bigger than we currently have it is going to be diminished. So tools like Tableau are just exceedingly important for us to quickly tell the story to someone who's new to the story.
Yeah, we've started working again on Tableau with Steve to just make that visible to a larger audience. I forgot to mention that in the last call, sorry, Virginia, but I suppose Steve is on that again, and he's really now it's focusing on making this this platform looks much more, appealing and also more easy to understand for someone who never heard about the project. So I'll let you know what it becomes.
Yeah, Virginia, I just want to add that planting 21,000 ebony, it looks like a small number, but in my knowledge, I don't know any project within the sub-Saharan African who has planted this native species for about 10,000, 20,000. I don't know yet. But adding on the 6,000 indigenous fruit trees is really very encouraging because, as Vincent said, the success of 70% survival rate is one of the highest we can have in the forest zone. And this success rate is high because farmers, after planting, take care of the trees. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, although I think the Ebony Project is very peculiar, and the area where we are active, because we are planting trees, or we are helping people to plant trees in an area that's still considered a forest area. I mean, most people are engaged in collecting non-timber forest products or live on bushmeat hunting, and they also are farming. But not extensively. So they mostly live from the forest, and there is no. I mean, people are a bit surprised when we come, and we explain what they can get from planting trees, because it's not a common idea in those areas. Like, for instance, the bush mango that Zach have mentioned that that people are planting in this project. It's a very important species in Cameroon, but also in Nigeria and Gabon. It's really important as a revenue and as a food source. And people used to go in the forest just to collect those fruits on the ground when it's fruiting. But the number of trees around the village is never enough for the communities, because they collect all of that, and they convert the seeds, the kernel, into a product that they can keep for the whole year. It's a source of starch, and so the people are in competition for that resource, and they have to go very far away in the forest. They camp for weeks, usually, in some places. Several tens of kilometers away from the village to collect enough fruits. So we are explaining to people how they can benefit from planting, and actually species that there are some species like this one that are relatively easy to multiply, and from that they can actually increase a lot the incomes of the households. And for that the project is a bit special, because we are pushing people to plant trees in a place where the forest is already there. But it's also a place where forest is being destroyed at alarming rates. So even if the people living in these places do not feel that strongly, but they have some sense of it, but they don't foresee how the forest is going to disappear around themselves. In a matter of decades, there will be probably no forest around those villages where we are working. So that's why it's really important to start already now conserving and multiplying the trees that are most valuable for those people.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting point about this project, right? There's an impact at the species level. So ebony, the species of ebony that this project helps replant, had formerly been categorized as endangered by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, which maintains a red list on threatened species. And in part because of the work this project has done to replant ebony, that was moved from endangered to vulnerable. So we're seeing this project impact on the species level. And then, as Vincent says, the Congo Basin, this is the second largest rainforest in the world that we're working in, right? This is the left lung of the planet. And it's a much different rainforest landscape than areas of the Amazon and areas of Asian tropical rainforest, where you see really large scale destruction, often for things like commercial farming. The Congo Basin looks a lot different. It's what's in our realm called a high forest, low deforestation landscape. And there really hasn't been a lot of solutions applied to that kind of landscape where we increase the value of forest cover for these communities that live within the forest. And I think that building out that concept and building out the concept of what the Ebony Project is doing is going to be critical as we think about how do we conserve the world's second largest rainforest while also honoring the wishes and the needs of the hundreds of millions of people that live within it. So,
well,
I'm sorry, Dr. Zach.
Lots of people. Go ahead, Dr. Zach.
Yeah, what I wanted to say that the lesson from this Ebony Project is when working with farmer, you help them to produce what they eat before selling the surplus. If you bring them to produce what they eat before selling the surplus, then they accept the project. And this is what is happening with Ebony. Because Ebony would take 80 years, 100 years, but the bush mango and other species are reduced to 3-4 years for fruiting. So the model we develop now in the project, in Ebony Project in Cameroon, I'm very confident that it could be expanded easily in the Congo Basin, in the other country of the Congo Basin, because the model is very solid. Convincing farmers to plant, farmers living in the forest, to plant trees in the forest is the challenge we overcome. And we are so confident that this project could be, the model could be expanded easily in other countries of the Congo Basin, and even out of the Congo Basin, because we have solid data for that. Thanks.
Scott, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, what is somewhat unique about the Ebony Project, as you, the three of you just commented on, we're operating in a region of still largely intact forests. We all know that roads are the kind of great, cause of destruction. Once a road penetrates an intact forest area, you start to see a splintering and biological decay. When we talk about farmers, we're talking about very small communities, very remote communities along the road, typically in very remote areas. And this is exactly where the Ebony Project is working, and to kind of biologically enhance a region that is very likely to experience rapid biological decay because it was, a largely intact area, a road gets built through, trucks start to come through, populations start to grow, that's where you start to see the biological dieback on both sides of the road. And the Ebony Project working in villages along these roads and in enhancing the biodiversity. I'm sure that you're about to get into some of Vincent's work with the symbiotic relationship between a lot of trees and birds and animals to helping reproduce the trees. So I think for the populations that live there, as Zach was talking about, to provide an enhanced food source that maybe will limit, bushmeat hunting, perhaps, if we're lucky, and to enhance the habitat so that the birds and animals also can survive. And we're experiencing elephant, oh God, what was it, Virginia? Elephant starvation, I forgot the word, but we're seeing a lot of West African elephants starve because many of their seasonal food sources are just being diminished.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue for Vincent, and maybe to contextualize a little bit what Scott just mentioned. There's a long-term study out of Gabon that shows that there's been a decline in fruit production of native fruit trees, probably because of climate change. And so, we have to keep in mind that we're implementing this project in this very dynamic space. And it's dynamic because deforestation is changing in the Congo Basin. It's also dynamic because the world we're growing these cheeses in, the world we live in, is changing around us. Vincent, do you want to talk a little bit about how it's connected to how ebony is connected to the rest of the forest and what your research has shown?
Yeah, so as you said, elephants is dependent on those large fruited trees that constitute its foods, seasonal food sources. But actually, that relationship goes both ways, because those species also depend on elephants, mostly for seed dispersal. And within the project, we are trying as well to really understand what are the threats on the species and how it's regenerates in the forest. And that was the basis. I mean, that work is also the purpose of that work is to be able to really evaluate the conservation status of the species and to provide guidance to the policymakers as it comes to decision regarding how much tree can be harvested, or where can be harvested, or where is the tree still present in Cameroon. And we found that those ebony trees, they are the African ebony tree, they are producing very large seeds and in very large fruits. And these fruits are eaten by large mammals, in particular elephants and large duikers. And we found that the dispersal by the mean of this mammal is needed for the species to regenerate. Like when we go to a forest where elephants have been hunted long ago, or and where duikers are less abundant, then the species there is not reproducing well. Actually, it's reproducing very badly compared to a protected area where there are still elephants. And I think that's a very important thing to remember, because ebony is not the only species that will suffer of that. Well, we had the chance to study ebony. That's how we discovered that. But there are other species like bushmango we mentioned, or moabi, that also are large-seeded species valuable to humans. That are also moabi is also a timber. And they are very important for local communities, and they will all probably disappear with the disappearance of elephants. And at least that's what's going on with ebony. And we also worked. I mean, ebony is peculiar in many ways. One of the ways is this very long dispersal distance it has, because it's dispersed by those large mammals. But it's also peculiar because it's have to produce those fruits, it needs to be pollinated. It's a dioecious species, so it means trees are either male or female, like humans are. And so to reproduce the species entirely depends on pollination. It cannot self-pollinate its flower. So we discovered that pollination happened at relatively short distance, actually much shorter distance than the seed dispersal distance. And that's quite uncommon for tropical trees in general. And this is also an important fact, because it's something important when you cut a tree. You have to understand those distances and the density of the population, the minimal density for the species to continue reproducing, to continue to have male trees that can pollinate female trees because they are not too far away. And so that's also something we are interested in, and we are actively researching. Yeah.
Great, thanks. There's also, I believe, sometime early in the project where we'd identified a bunch of ebony trees and we were hoping to get fruit from them, and then some of them ended up being male trees, and we were a little disappointed in their fruiting production. So lots of learning on that front.
Yeah.
You know, Scott, you mentioned earlier this idea of telling the story of the Ebony Project, and I think Dr. Zach's done a good job at telling us about how local communities have kind of responded to this. I'm curious, you know, from your side, as this large corporation that interacts with your customers, what kind of response, if any, have you seen to this kind of work, and what do you think the lessons are there?
We've seen a very overwhelmingly positive response to the work that the sustainability efforts that Taylor has been involved with on behalf of the people who use and love Taylor guitars. I think there's a lot of folks in the musical instrument manufacturing community who are increasingly involved with environmental and sustainability initiatives, because, I mean, it's the right thing to do. I could go on about the customer response, and that's very rewarding. And we are a business, so if we don't sell guitars, we're no longer in business. But it's not really why we're doing it. I think Bob Taylor and Andy Powers are very astutely aware that the resources that our industry has relied upon for hundreds of years are changing quickly, and we have to be far more proactive. Some of the projects, for example, our work with restoration in Hawaii, you know, we might be able to see wood, well, probably not in my lifetime. I think I'm being a little bit optimistic, but certainly in my children's lifetime, trees that we're planting now will be harvested for guitars in the future. With ebony, you know, it's 80 years, 90 years, 120 years. We frankly don't know, but we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And we're just trying to give back to a resource that has provided the materials for our industry for hundreds of years. So yes, the customer response has been overwhelmingly positive, and that's great. We've got a lot of kudos from you know, National Geographic and CNN and Forbes, and we were just Fast Company's top 10 most innovative manufacturer for 2022. And this is all wonderful. But sincerely, I think Bob Taylor started this work because he felt it was the right thing to do. If we're going to take, then we need to give. And now more than ever, we probably have to start giving back more than we're taking.
Great. I think that's a great note to end on, right? I think we all started this project knowing it was a forestry project and that none of us were likely to live to see this ebony harvested. But what I think has been really rewarding, you know, for us at UCLA and the Congo Basin Institute has been to see all the things this project has produced that we didn't foresee, right? So yeah, we're having an impact on ebony as a species, and we're also having an impact on the communities where we're planting, where we're helping to literally feed those communities and feed the value chain of those locally valuable fruit. But then there's all of this other stuff that's spinning out of it, right? is this a potential model for high forest, low deforestation landscapes? Is this a way to bring additional attention and resources on the interaction between elephants and forests and their importance, their synergy with each other to keep each other healthy? And so it's been exciting to see the spin-offs that are happening, in the last 6 years, and will hopefully continue to happen, even if none of us are going to be there for that ebony to hit 100 years and be ready. So I'll just open it up in case anybody has any final thoughts that they want to share before we close out the panel. Go ahead, Dr. Zach.
Yes, thanks a lot, Virginia. The theme of this Rainforest Day was "The time is now." It fits very well the Ebony Project. The time is now to continue to involve local population in any tree planting project. Otherwise, we are going to fail. We cannot really protect the biodiversity, protect our environment without the first actor on the field, who are the farmers. I'm so grateful to Bob, UCLA, and all those involved in this project, because through this project, I have implemented the dream I had in restoring the ecosystem of the Congo Basin. But my last word is that what we are doing in the forest now is very valuable in humid savanna, in dry zone, and all that ecosystem, because here we have convinced farmers living in the forest to plant trees. Just imagine we take the same system in the dry part where farmer is already well aware that without trees cannot live. It will be easier. Our task will be more easier than what we are doing in the forest. So Ebony Project, wonderful project for me, for achievement of what we are doing, for touching the life of local population. And I think more year to go with this Ebony Project. Thanks a lot.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank everybody who joined us here today. We'll be taking live questions after this pre-recorded panel. I'd also like to thank the electricity and internet in Cameroon, where Dr. Zach and Vincent are, for holding out and allowing us to record this. Our concerns about the stability of that connection was the reason we did this as a pre-recorded panel. But I think it's worked out great. And Scott mentioned we do have lots of resources on the website crelicam.com/resources, where you can access our annual project reports, you can access peer-reviewed publications, and you can learn a little bit more about the project itself. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
Hello, everyone. So thank you for watching this streaming. It was so great to hear from both of you, Virginia and Scott. So for those who missed the very beginning of the streaming, Scott is the Director of Natural Resource Sustainability at Taylor Guitar, and Virginia is the Associate Director at the Congo Basin Institute. So thank you all for that wonderful conversation. I know personally, I'm interested in woodworking, and I'm nowhere near the skill set to use ebony, nor would I want to, not making guitars. But I know that woodworkers and people that use wood for craft really want that resource to last and stay around. So for me, that had a personal touch in that recording. I will help moderate the Q&A. If anyone here would like to ask any questions, the stage is open.
And if they don't, hi, Virginia.
Hey, I can ask Scott some questions while people warm up.
Absolutely.
Great. This is unrehearsed, so here we go. Scott, what do you think has been the biggest lesson you've learned so far? You individually, as somebody who's worked 30 years in the environmental space, or Taylor as a company?
Yeah, that's a pretty a deep question. I've been at Taylor for 6 years. As you mentioned, prior to that, my career has been spent in the environmental policy and advocacy world. I was at Greenpeace for 14 years. I've done all sorts of stuff. Never expected to end up at a guitar company. The biggest lesson learned, I honestly, it's just the importance of persistence. We are doing something. The approach of the Ebony Project is unique. I'm not going to say it's wholly unique, but it's different than, there's a huge reforestation, restoration movement, and that's wonderful. Lots and lots of different examples. The Ebony Project is quite unique. We're in some uncharted waters. We've certainly made mistakes, but just sheer persistence and the importance of having a team in Yaoundé, a team in Cameroon. When COVID hit, travel was very difficult. You getting out of Minnesota, me getting out of San Diego suddenly got complicated. And having a team, Dr. Zach and Vincent and the ever-growing team at the Congo Basin Institute was ridiculously valuable in our ability to keep this project going. We planted over 21,000 ebony trees and 6,000, 7,000 fruit trees. And the original science that the team is been publishing and is soon to publish, it's really impressive. And we could not have done it if not for having a really solid team in a strong batch of Cameroonians that are actually in the field doing a lot of the tough stuff.
Yeah, and to build on that idea, this project started as a 2-year commitment, right? It started as a 2-year project, and we were going to plant 15,000 ebony trees in 2 years. And I am struggling to contain my laughter at that idea 6 or 7 years later.
I think I still have the bar napkin.
Forestry is a long game, and especially when you're working with species that just aren't that studied. I see a comment in the chat about having never heard of a bush mango. You are not alone. Most people have not heard of a bush mango or a bush plum, which is another thing we plant as well. That the communities are big fans of, and that I'm a big fan of, grilled on the street. And so there's just been a huge learning curve. Dr. Zach has really dedicated his career to this and tried to build out the knowledge about these species, but there's so much we still don't know about them and how they interact and come together to create a sort of more comprehensive rainforest that supports the natural environment, biodiversity, and also the humans that live in it.
Yeah, I think if Dr. Zach was here, he would jump on that in terms of there's so many fruit and food sources that are well known, used for millennia in this part of the world that are largely unknown outside the region. And a lot of times development projects come in here and incentivize people to plant a cash crop that is alien to them, that they can't eat. And the Ebony Project it's kind of, the secret sauce of the project. It's called the Ebony Project, and we planted, what's our new target? 35,000 ebony trees we're going to reach, with a survival rate in the 80s, in and around a protected area. But it's the fruit trees. It's the fruit trees that are providing a food source for the humans in the area and eventually the wildlife in the area. And a food source that is locally understood and traditionally used has really been an amazingly important part of this project.
Agreed.
I have a question, if you don't mind me interjecting. There's so much talk about reforesting naturally and making sure that there's a variety of species in the area that are native, that will grow. What are some of the ways that you categorize where you're going to place ebony trees or other trees that you're planting? And how do you also ensure that in those areas that you're focusing on, that they're surviving with the other trees and not taking over or competing for light, etc.?
So that's a great question. And at the early stage of the project, Vincent actually spent a lot of time culling through every known time that ebony had grown throughout its range. And then he used a complicated computer program that I don't fully understand to create a model of where ebony grew. So this is based on where it had been found before and the climatic conditions in those locations. And he was able to model out where ebony should grow. And so our project is focused entirely where ebony should be growing and is appropriate to grow. And then I think this also points to why it's so important to do some of the research work instead of just the planting work, because for some of these species, we don't know a lot about how they interact. Vincent mentioned in the talk, we learned that the pollination distance is relatively short compared to other trees, and the seed dispersal distance is relatively long. So that means if you have, a male and a female, and the male gets logged and there's no other male close enough around that female tree isn't going to keep reproducing. And so we need to be kind of thinking about, well, how frequently do we need these to occur? How frequently are they occurring naturally? And we need to find some space in the middle where we're recreating a mature forest as well as we can, while also providing the income and the food source for populations in the area. Because if those populations don't see value in those trees, they're just not going to stay standing.
Yeah, Luther, I'd take a whack at that too, because it's a super deep question. It's a super profound question. That this whole global reforestation, restoration movement, it's not that old. 5, 6 years old. I mean, I'm old. And when I used to live in Washington, D.C., you couldn't get a job working on reforestation, restoration if your life depended on it. Now it's this with climate change, and there's what are they up to? A billion trees, 1 trillion trees. There's all these initiatives to plant trees. And it's wonderful. I believe in an all of the above approach, and different horses for different courses. But we've been doing this long enough now that we're starting to get returns on some of the heavily invested in reforestation projects. And surprise, surprise, some of them have been successful, some of them have been failures. And the issue of planting the right tree in the right place is really something that people are focusing in on, but it's really complex because you've got climate change and a lot of concern that species that are native to a region, that in some cases we're seeing evidence that they're migrating trees. The range is migrating north or south because of climate change, and the anticipation of that migration is only growing. You've got, everyone's concerned about logging. And again, 14 years at Greenpeace, I'm also concerned about logging. But I've learned that in this part of the world, in the Congo Basin, looking at ebony, while logging is a threat, the biggest threat is wholesale forest conversion to large-scale agriculture. Before you even go in and attempt to get out viable trees, just converting it to agriculture. But in the long term, the greatest threat, and this is what Vincent's research is uncovering, is the loss of the large mammals that are distributing the seeds. And this project is discovering that if you go into the Central African Republic, where there are still, comparatively speaking, large populations of native elephant herds, the population of ebony is X. And as you move away from that, and the population of elephants starts to drop off, correspondingly, the population of ebony is dropping off, to the point where if you go to an area where they haven't seen an elephant in 30 years, there's very few ebony trees younger than 30 years because the seeds are big. And it takes a big mammal like an elephant or a yellowback duiker to eat it, put it in its digestive tract, walk down the road and poop it out. And that is how the tree, one of the important ways the tree reproduces. So the loss of large mammals in the Congo Basin is probably the greatest long-term threat to the survival of a bunch of tree species that have evolved for millennia, reproducing thanks to animals pooping.
I can't think of a better thing to end our session on than the importance of animals pooping to the rainforest.
Everybody's got to poop.
Trees have to procreate, and that's how they do it.
Well, thank you so much. If you have any last remarks, absolutely feel free to share them.
Going once, going twice.
Okay.
See you guys.
So yeah, all you have to do is press the leave button.
Thanks, everybody.